Hello everyone and welcome back to Backlog Banter. My name is Tucker Hazell and this is Dev Dive, a show where I get a chance to talk to interesting developers about their games. And today we have Julien Eveillé, who made the game Threshold that we're going to be talking about and going deep in today to learn about all of the design history and stories and everything that went into it. But of course, if you enjoy this, subscribe to the channel, watch some of my other ones, you know, all the YouTube plugs. But Julien, I'm very excited to have you here today. We've been working on this for a while, trying to get this lined up, and I've just been thinking about the game and writing questions and trying to come up with things. But Threshold is a game that not a lot of people might have heard of, and it's also kind of a weird game. So I guess going to start things off. How do you describe this game to people to intrigue them, like when you're first trying to get the pitch across?
I tend to say that it's a game based on real facts that will let you pick your own country as a difficulty setting, because I think that's something that is rarely seen in a game. So it draws curiosity, at least. And when it comes to the game itself, I'm not the best at pitching ideas, So usually people aren't so convinced when I propose a concept, when I talk about a concept. But yeah, in that case, it's just I would describe it as a light survival horror experience. It's horror is also debatable, because it's more of an atmospheric and oppressing atmosphere more than an actual horror game, where there's someone chasing you or something. And so yeah, it's not really in the same exact area, I would say.
It's not a traditional horror game, but I think that's what makes it so interesting and why I'm so excited to talk about it, is because there's a lot of small design choices and I think an interesting history here as well that kind of set it apart. But speaking to that interesting and unique history, I want you to tell me frankly, but also the people watching this, a little bit about yourself and your history in game development before making Threshold. What is your history as a designer?
So as a designer, I first landed into a small internship after 3 years doing a scholarship around game design. Then I had a small internship, like the summer internship that you get after your studies, that you are supposed to have, in a small mobile game company.
Okay.
That was interesting. That was cool. And after that, I got a job at Arkane Lyon, working on Dishonored 2 for a year as a QA, and I then wanted to actually transition to like the design side of things. That's something that I wanted to do. I was really interested in both the people in the level design team and also like just the fact of building levels with that team, because they're like madly talented and also kind-hearted, So that was a great mix. That's cool. I basically made maps on my free time on the the Arkane engine, submitted some to the lead level designers, and at some point they basically got me into a meeting and told me, okay, we're gonna trust you for actually that job and see how it goes. And that was interesting, because they were trusting me, even though actually my the map that I submitted to them wasn't that great. It was actually pretty bad. They felt like maybe I was
You had potential.
yeah, and maybe I made the efforts, and they
Sure.
they saw that I was involved, and I wanted to make the best out of it. So yeah, maybe they felt like, okay, we can push that person a bit further. And I remained at Arkane for in total 7 years or something like that. So I worked on Dishonored Death of the Outsider as a level designer, Wolfenstein Youngblood, which was a collaboration with Machine Games, then Deathloop, and a bit of Blade as well. And now I'm at Crytek. It's been a year and a half, something like that. And I've been working on Crisis 4 and recently Hunt Showdown.
Yeah, so you've been able to build up a pretty sizable lineup of important games in just a couple of years, which I think is really cool. And the reason why I was so excited to talk to you specifically and why I thought you'd be able to offer an interesting perspective for a developer interview is because you now, having released Threshold and developed Threshold by yourself, have worked on the biggest games that are getting big budgets and are from established teams that have this long history, and in the case of Crisis and Dishonored and Blade, working on IP that are long standing. But you also now have development history making something small scale and working on your own, and learning the intricacies of just making something by yourself. And so that balance, I think, is fascinating. And let's get a little bit into Threshold itself. When did you first have the idea to make this game? First off, have you always wanted to make a game by yourself? And if so, like, when did Threshold become an idea that you're like, I need to pursue this one specifically?
I don't know if I always wanted that, but at some point, working in AAA, you can find yourself frustrated by how, you don't have control on everything, basically, and you have to accept that. Other people are also bringing their ideas to the table. That's perfectly normal and everything. But yeah, if you want to tell some stories and have a very clear idea of something you want to make, while remaining uncompromising, so either you are becoming you become a full-time bully, and try to to work with that, forever. Yeah, you do something on your side, that drives you. And what drove me there was some sort of a political message, I would say, maybe, to bring to the table. And it comes just from an idea, a simple idea, that my wife at some point told me about a number. And I don't know if I'm spoiling or not, I'm not sure how I should.
Well, I think, look, this is a developer interview. If you have not played the game, before we start getting into more design elements and things that could be considered spoilers, if you're watching this and you haven't played the game, go play it. It is on Steam. It is cheap. It is quick. I really enjoy it. I do recommend it strongly, as many people do. But we want to get into all the nerdy little bits about this game, and we're just going to go full into it.
Sounds good. Okay, I like that. So yeah, my wife once told me that in France every day there's 3 million animals getting killed, for slaughtered or fished, for human consumption in general. And I was like, okay, 3 million in a day just in France, that's huge. And I'm not even vegan. I'm vegetarian, but don't have really a problem with people eating meat or whatever. But it felt like it's something that should be known a bit more, and because it's something that is really overlooked. We never talk about it, and I would have never imagined that there were so much animals killed every day. It's like, it means that in a month, it's like the entirety of the population of France would be wiped out.
Yeah, and that's just one country in a relatively
just
small
one country.
country.
Exactly. So imagine for the US or China, it's nuts.
Of course.
And I thought, okay, maybe it would be interesting to make a game, that shows these numbers for real. So I thought, okay, what would be really cool is to have a game where when you start the game, there's some sort of counter that will accumulate the animals that have been killed since you started the game in the country you pick. That will eventually, so as the end of the game, make them fall into the map, and that's gonna be the number of animals that have been killed during your shift. Thing is, for performance reasons, you will rarely see everything. Because if you play, for example, the country I play test the most with is France, but it's a playthrough of maybe 50 minutes or something like that. We can give you something like 300,000 animals killed or something like that.
And you can't load in 300,000 bodies with physics and all of that. That's just not feasibly possible for a game that's designed by one guy. But here's the great thing about it is, when you hit the end of the game and a wall of animal corpses come washing down upon you, you have no idea how much it is. It doesn't matter, because it's a lot regardless.
Absolutely. And at some point you end up being depends on how quick you react to this, on how quick you solve the situation, but you can end up with something like the max I saw during playthroughs and stuff is like 40,000 animals. That's why in the statistic table that appears at the end of the game, the final data table, you've got the amount of killed people. It's just labeled as killed, so it remains a bit mysterious. And you've got the total number. Then there's a fallen number. And the fallen number is
Oh,
the actual
gotcha.
number of the ones that have actually that actually fell in the map.
Rendered and fell to the game. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, but technically, if you waited, for a while and had a lot of Arcanes to bite on, you could see those 300,000 animals fall into the map.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, it's a fascinating idea that shows that you kind of worked from this game in a backwards angle, because the
Absolutely.
idea that really drove you is ultimately the climax of the game, and that's a really interesting way to face development from sort of what what's going to happen at the very end and then work your way backwards. But I'm curious, when did that initial idea come to you? Was this a couple of years ago? How long have you actually been working on the game?
I heard about that 2 years ago, about that number. I kind of started right away because I had in mind, that sequence. Actually, that was just what I had, that what I wanted to represent in something quite gruesome, of a rain of animals. Basically, that's what I wanted to picture. Make it a bit shocking, make it a bit memorable. In total, it took me 1 year and a half. So on the side of my AAA job, so it was like working very early in the morning or late at night. Yeah, that was a bit tiring.
Of course. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad I was able to push it through the end.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that is, again, the balance is something that I kept thinking about as I was playing the game and learning more about you as a developer, is that you're still currently working on, and we're working on for the, as far as I know, the entire history of making Threshold, working alongside on level design on Crisis and Blade and Deathloop and like these big games. And so that balance is not something a lot of people have the interest or energy for, because it's very difficult. It's tiring, as you said. But I am curious, in working in two different spheres at once on big games and then also on your own to create something unique, what design skills that you gathered from working on the big games were you able to apply to making something on your own, which obviously became Threshold?
I think the most prominent one would be level design. I've heard a lot of nice things about level design of Threshold, despite it being really small. But I wanted to actually bring what I learned from Arkane in particular. With the depth of the environments and all the things that you can do in them, even though in Threshold you don't have a lot of tools, so your interactions will ultimately be very limited. The idea was to still support every interactions that you feel like you can do. There's a bucket, and you are told to use the bucket for just cleaning the filter, but you can also try other things, and actually uncover some mysteries thanks to that. So the idea was to have something that was a bit kind of holding together, basically.
I mean, the level design I think is really interesting because it is a small area. There are two buildings, there's a river, there's a staircase there. But what is so fascinating about it is that even the little elements that might seem sort of innocuous as you're first, well, just walking around, it's like, oh, that's just a hill, that's just a tree, these little things you don't understand until the game, I think quite smartly, paces out and introduces a couple of mechanics across the course of the runtime that everything is placed there for a reason. The little mound in the back is the grave of the previous shift worker. The trees that are there you can use to get extra planks for the section where you're repairing the different parts of the map. The area at the end of the river then collects the stuff that you can use the bucket on, and then the bucket you can use to dig the gravel. And like, there's all these little things that might just seem sort of like flavor text or environment, just background at first, but the amount of mechanics, you say it's limited, but I think it worked perfectly for what's in this game, because what really Threshold is to me is a compelling way to use a small set of mechanics to where it feels tense, even though you only have a limited number of things you can do. Threshold is based around the idea that you have to keep this train moving on time, and then you kind of find yourself like a hamster in a hamster wheel running in circles trying to pick up the pace as things are going. And it creates this really unique tension that is horror from its aesthetic, but is more like a thriller. It's ramping things up. The tension is building. And it's all based around just these couple of mechanics. And I would talk a little bit about the aesthetic of the game, because that's where the horror thing comes in. Is there's blood and there's corpses and it's gritty and sepia tone, and it's gross, frankly.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
yeah.
want to be there. You wanted to make a horror game from the beginning because of this idea of the animal bodies and the amount of slaughter that happens. But how did you discover sort of the low poly aesthetic and the color palette? How did that all come to sort of support that message that you wanted to get across?
It was a mix of choices of just I like that aesthetic. I grew with it. When my first game was Metal Gear Solid on it, on Quake, and it kind of really bonded me with that medium. It stayed, I would say. So there's that, and there's also the fact of some sort of pragmatism of me not being an artist at first. I really didn't want to lose my time, working on an asset for too long. That wouldn't even look that great, I guess, in the end. I like to give some room to interpretation. Also, it helps sometimes to have something a bit more rough in its shape to create some sort of uneasiness, maybe. Also, the simple reason of having a lot of ragdolls at the end of the game, if they all have a lot of polygon on top of that, it just adds up to the complexity and like the performance issue that could come. So it was also a bit of that.
Yeah. With the aesthetic, which I think totally makes sense, trying to balance your skills and the processing power of this small game and everything, what I think is able to sell it is that there is this grunginess, this grossness, frankly, from the very beginning, the sense of danger because of stains of blood everywhere and seeing a fish corpse wash off and like having Mo, this character that you interact with, having blood on his face. It creates a unique, tense atmosphere from two design choices at the beginning that I thought were really instantly intriguing. Number one is my favorite little narrative touch in the whole game is that the characters write to one another instead of speaking. It gives the game a unique sense of tone because there's not inflection. Because the characters aren't like yelling at one another, they have to write everything down. And then also, so that's one of the elements. And the second one is always having the mouth icon in the top corner of
Yeah.
the screen that gets bloodier and bloodier as it goes along. And I want to talk about both of those because I think they're both really interesting. But just quickly, I wanted to mention that the little mouth icon with the bits of blood evolving over the course of the game, it reminded me of like the little sprite window in Doom where the
Yeah,
guy's face is
absolutely.
looking around. But this is just a mouth. And that's also the only thing you see of your character. So it's like there's this really interesting tension building things from the first moment you step out into the area because the characters can't talk to one another and you have this kind of creepy little mouth in the corner that just
Yeah.
makes you uneasy.
Yeah, actually, those two elements, so the mouth, comes from basically the game built itself a lot from playtests that I was conducting because at first, obviously, the game was much more bare bones. And every time you see someone playing, you realize, okay, now if I want, to play on the fact that consuming air, like jumping or running, consumes air. I have to make it understandable. So at first, I just made some sort of feedback on the corner of the screen that made it red, but people weren't super. I mean, it was really present, really annoying, and also, I don't know. I wanted something that was a bit more weird and unusual, that would feel a bit more special as well. So I don't remember exactly how it came to my mind, but it eventually did, and I tried that, and I felt, okay, that's fun, that's like just weird enough to be to be something. And yeah, the fact of writing notes, it's actually interesting as well because actually most of these ideas come from initial constraints. I didn't have the budget to pay for voice actors. It's also much more complicated to make some rewrites or make
Yeah.
some
Oh, sure.
tweaks
Hmm.
to it on last minute, and sometimes you need that.
Yeah, and for localization, that would have been a lot more work.
Absolutely, absolutely. At the very first, I tried with a synthesized voice just to try out a bit how it could feel. It was interesting. I mean, Mo had also an interesting, creepy feel to him when he had a voice. But yeah, at some point, I thought, okay, maybe it should just be notes on. It makes sense for the actual narrative. So everything, kind of fit it together perfectly.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to hear these stories of how constraints in development lead to design decisions that can work in multiple ways. And again, that's kind of the key of Threshold, is that every small design decision can splinter off into a couple of things, even within this small area. Another interesting thing about Threshold in its, I guess, development process is you put out a demo of this game that people checked out and that sort of gave people a taste of, especially the tone of the game. But narratively, that demo it's a narrative prequel to the actual game, which is a really interesting choice that I haven't really seen done. And the only example I can think of is The Adventures of Captain Spirit, which is a prequel to Life is Strange 2, which was released as the demo for that game. This is obviously it's a different scenario, but what made you want to make the demo like kind of a different game than the full experience?
I was a bit trapped, because the beginning of Threshold, there's this cool elevator moment that is a bit iconic, and I wanted to, I don't know, it felt like if I'm putting it there in a demo, it's maybe ruining a bit the moment for the time when you are making it again, in the main game. So it's not a surprise anymore. It's not as special, basically. I was also afraid of, the game is already so short. Like the demo would have been super short, and you could have done a lot of things, in the demo if it was just like the 10 minutes, the first 10 minutes or something. So an arbitrary thing, you could have actually done maybe if you speedrun it 60% of the game or something like that.
Yeah.
So I felt a bit trapped with that. So I thought, okay, maybe it should be another story, but still selling the mood and still selling that atmosphere basically on some of the rules of the place, like the fact that you have to write on that kind of stuff. And it just felt like, okay, there is this other character that is buried in the main game. And I felt like all the story of Threshold revolves around that character as well. He led some marks on the walls and stuff like that. So that would make sense to talk about that guy and actually maybe impersonate it for just a few minutes as if it was his first day and he's discovering. And you can already see that if you are looking at some elements for long enough, Nee tells to himself like, "Hey, could I climb this?" when he's looking at the wall, for example. And so it's kind of a small foreshadowing of the bit of scaffolding that is next to the wall in the main game. So I try to make it tie together, hold together. But it's a bit, I'm not super happy with the demo because it's bare bones even more. Some people were frustrated by the fact that it's just, Mo writing your stuff, and that's it. So it's not completely giving what the main game is about, but I would rather have that instead of, having something that would have been awkwardly either cut or spoiling the beginning.
Yeah, I think it's a smart decision, and I think it does give this game a unique touch of not many people do something unique for their demo, and it does make sense in the context of the world and the game and all of that. There's one element in that's not in the demo that's sort of the main thrust of the actual game, which is over the course of the game managing the expected pace of the terrain and managing your breath and using the canisters, which is kind of that feedback loop that I was mentioning earlier that I think gives the game a really unique sense of tension. Is having to manage, it's a resource management game at the end of the day, is you have to manage your air, which then goes up and down depending on how much exploration you're doing. And so then you have to worry about, should I go out of my way to do something else? Or what if the train slows down? Then but you still have to manage to get tickets, to get more canisters, to then fill it up. And so you're always balancing the pros and cons of doing any action in the game, which I think gives a unique weight to things. But with the canisters and the train, let's start with the canisters, because I think that is another great tension-building, weird moment when you first are given your canister and you have to refill your air, and you bite it and you spit out like blood and teeth and glass on the floor, and it sits there. How did you come to the idea of the canisters, which are really, really weird, and then how did you sort of like implement them as a way to like refill your air meter?
Basically, the idea was to, so have that survival element, that keeps you engaged and forces you to have that loop that prevents you to just, wander around for too long and discover everything in 5 minutes. It also gives you some, room for finding stuff, and also you get involved then into trying to find more in the environment that are scattered around. The visual idea, etc., was, I think, more of a vibe thing, not a vibe, but like I didn't want just to have something that is like a, I don't know, I'm, plugging something or whatever on up, I'm now good. It just felt like, okay, maybe I should do a bit more than that. Maybe I don't like doing things that have been seen before. That sounds maybe a little pretentious, but I don't see the point of just doing the same thing that somebody already did, even if I'm doing it 5% better, and I won't, as a solo dev, I don't have the financial means or like technical means to do better than what is already standard elsewhere. So I'd rather do my own thing and make it in the in the direction of the whole game, which is putting you into an uncomfortable situation on the mindset, on preparing you for something that is bigger eventually, for the climax, basically. So that was done with that in mind, and it actually, brought a lot of things like, for the world building as well. When you are in the intro, in the underground facility, there are some panels with written like dentist office, and there's actually several reference to dental insurance, stuff like that. And same, I wanted to make it loop together and have something that makes sense, despite the fact that it doesn't. I mean,
Yeah, and that is one great element of the game. But then there's also the train, which is what really drives the tension of the game. You mentioned the air canisters as a tone, as a like mood piece and a mood setter. But the train is the beating heart of the game. And so I just got to know, how did you design the expected pace to change over time? Like literally in the code, or like how you balanced it, the train to speed up, slow down over time. How did you balance that? Because I imagine that is very core to the feeling and pace of the game. So it's probably something you spend a lot of time like tweaking.
yeah, there are a lot of bugs revolving that thing. Also, the idea is that in the first part of the game, when you are like introduced, to the world on how the systems work, the expected pace will remain very gentle. Basically, it's gonna just remain at, I think, speed 3 or something, and sometimes go down a little bit. You have to put it back up, and that's about it until Mo explains you everything, which means also that you have to gather the planks. Once you get that, so all of a sudden you are asked to push twice more. Once you are at that speed, and that you get into a certain position in the map or looking at a specific spot, the train will stop abruptly. Then you will be, it start over from the beginning, and then it's gonna be basically, a never-ending push forward until the end. Like so, basically, it's like in the fiction, it's something like it's stopping because there is already too much on the other side of the front of the border. Basically, it's kind of overflowing already, and you are doing the last push by pushing it and keeping on pushing it while it's already filled up on the other side, and that's why eventually it just completely overflows the wall. Even there's also some part of the tension that is a bit artificial, just a bit. For example, if you are like hoarding too many canisters, like more than 2, your air is gonna deplete a bit faster. There's gonna be some sort of an extra nerf to your breathing ability, basically, and it's gonna get worse the more you have Arkane. At some point it stops, there's a threshold in that. But it was, to push the players in like, even if you are feeling confident, okay, now I'm good, I've got 8 Arkanes, it's gonna deplete way faster, even if you don't notice it, in order to keep the tension and not make you, in a situation that I don't want you to be in.
That's remarkable. They're going crazy.
Yeah, it's actually quite rare that she does it that intensely.
Let's talk about one interesting part of the game that I think people have sort of come to discover more recently, which is that there is an Easter egg to the game mouthwashing in the game. In the opening part of the game, there is a single bottle of mouthwash, which is, I think, almost exactly the same model as the mouthwash bottles from the game Mouthwashing, which is a game that I played and enjoyed, and a lot of people have been loving lately. And I'm curious, what inspired you to put that in the game, and like, what's your dynamic or relationship with the Wrong Organ team? Like, do you just like the game and you want to reference it? It does fit in sort of the vibe of the game, but how did that come about, that Easter egg?
Oh, it was very simple. I don't remember exactly in which order it went, but basically we did some sort of a auto cross promo thing, auto organized, I would say, because we all are in the critical reflex portfolio basically. There's actually also a reference to Arctic eggs on the buckshot roulette.
Oh, I didn't notice those.
In that same place, but you've got to be in China because you have to be at Mount Everest to have the pan, a reference to the can you cook eggs on top of Mount Everest.
Of course.
So that's a bit more hidden one. I think no one saw it already, or no one noticed it. And there's the can, the beer can of buckshot roulette next to a bench. I got to the devs and asked them, hey, can you give me your model of mouthwash, And at first it was like just a mouthwash bottle, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna put it somewhere. And actually it felt, no, actually, there's something going on with the mouth in my game as well. So
dental hygiene. Yeah,
absolutely. So that makes sense. So it's actually perfectly fitting with the story. That's cool. So I added a sink, and did put the mouthwash bottles there. And I'm glad that it fits completely the narrative. So that doesn't even feel like some people didn't even understand or maybe some didn't play the mouthwashing game because otherwise you recognize the shape and everything. But I saw some people that didn't seem to have played the game and still said like, oh yeah, mouthwash, why mouthwash there? That's fun.
Yeah. Well, it also is interesting when you think about sort of the way that might fit into the world. The idea that your mouth is getting bloody from all of the biting into the glass canisters. Can you imagine how painful it would be to drink mouthwash after your teeth and your gums and your tongue are all cut up by glass? That would be the worst thing ever.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
But I do think that it's nice that there is a little edge of lightheartedness to the game in those references, in the way that you can have small touches happen. And one of these kind of hidden sort of lighthearted things is that there's a duck in the game that you can find and then becomes your buddy and follows you around, and you can give him a name. So when did that duck enter development, and how did you sort of incorporate that into the design of the game?
That's funny because I recall that the game was in a pretty not final shape, but all the components were there already. Polish wasn't done yet, but I felt like, okay, the loop is working, the story is working basically. On there was not much missing aside from maybe having some sort of a small hope thingy. I recall speaking to a friend about it. The game already went a bit scope creep because it was supposed to be a 5-minute game at first. I recall saying to my friend, like, I should have had a duck, to have someone to save actually, to get to the end of the story, and you could even carry it, and it's a friend from Arkane, and I had that kind of same attitude at Arkane of, wanted to bring goofy stuff. He told me like, you're not gonna add another thing now, it's too much, Julien, stop it. And I'm glad I did, actually. I'm glad I added it because it also helps giving a sense to the whole plot. Because, if you find it, you are like saving it, and you have these special relationships with it, but it's, when you think about it, like if you think about it, it's not a different duck from the hundreds and thousands of ones that you'll be falling in the map. And eventually, actually, if you don't carry it. On the threshold happens, on everything falls apart. He will die. You can actually bring it to the pile of corpses, and he's gonna ragdoll and die among the other corpses. So
Well, I mean, I think it does balance out that narrative of how dire things are and how many animals are slaughtered every day, but also that you can still befriend an animal, you can still save an animal. There is a little glimmer of hope, and in this game that is a dark world where a wall of blood basically washes down on you at the end, having this sort of one element that still gives you a spark of hope, I think is a nice little touch, especially if you find the duck and if you save it. There are some caveats there, but I think it's a nice little bow on top of the whole thing. And I asked you earlier what things you learned from the bigger games you worked on that you applied then to Threshold, but even on the other end, do you think there's anything you learned from making Threshold and learning maybe some new skills in art design or different kinds of balancing that you'll then apply to your work on AAA games, on Crisis, or things that you work on in the future?
I learned a lot of modeling skills. I knew a bit of Blender and that kind of stuff, but didn't know it that much. Also learned a lot of scripting for Unreal, even though also I had some basis, but I had to actually dig the topics, on get my hands dirty basically. Learned how to deal with a publisher, speak to a publisher on localize a game, all that kind of things that you are not used to actually. And there's also that thing of having to deal with the release. It's all going your way. It's not like when you are in a AAA where you are 300 to share the responsibility of either a failure or a success, which kind of helps. For Threshold it was a success basically. I mean, at least a critical success, and that's cool. And there were still some people that were unhappy, especially at launch, because some edge cases were found by people. So I made a lot of fixes, but it was really stressful, really exhausting. You feel like you are not doing enough, but you are already at your max.
Yeah. And with this game now out, and you've done sort of the major fixes that you need to, and you can kind of look back on the whole experience, it seems like things have kind of calmed down now. Is this something that you think you'll pursue again alongside larger projects? Is maybe honing these skills in a second game, maybe preventing a little bit of scope creep so you can get things out a little bit quicker or something like that? But you have plans to make, or any other ideas to make other small games on your own?
In AAA, I'm kind of limited by what I can do. Actually, you're supposed to stay in your lane, even though it's really good to be proactive and speak with other teams, etc. Your responsibilities are kind of they have boundaries basically. Even if I'm learning sound skills or whatever, which I learned a lot of things about sound, which I think is really important in a game. It couldn't really be of use in a AAA situation, but yeah, I definitely want to not expand Threshold, but expand on ideas and try other things. Go a bit scope creep still, because I think it worked kind of well. I kind of knew where to stop still, but I wanted to have something that is fully fledged, and that feels like a proper whole, even if it's a short one. So yeah, I've got other ideas. The thing is, what's gonna be tricky, maybe a bit less now that I've got some audience, is the fact of that I don't want to make horror games all my life. As an indie, the next game I would like to do would be some sort of a mix between Metal Gear Solid, Evangelion, and all this kind of thing, so really different stuff. Got other ideas for horror game, but I don't want to be cataloged in again another person that only does that. I'd like to explore many things, and yeah, I hope I can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and my final question is about sort of this kind of small game that's really packed with interesting ideas. Do you have any other games that might have inspired you to want to make a game of this scope that you have really found a lot to engage with, that you could like recommend to other people as sort of homework of like these kind of inspired Threshold, or any recent ones that have come out that you're a really big fan of?
I would like to name one that I'm always forgetting to mention when I talk about Threshold's inspirations. It's Mondown.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So it's same. It's a bit short. It's happening in the Swiss Alps with a a specific language that is spoken by like 60,000 people, because the Swiss speak French. I mean, depending on where they are, it's a small country, but they speak French, German, and Italian, depending on where they are. And there are like there's a fourth language that is even less spoken, and it's in the center of Switzerland. It's in that language, so it has a lot of charm. It's blending a lot of, a bit of German, of Italian, of French together. Really cool idea to bring that to the table, and it's in an interesting setting. It's kind of the countryside, but in the mountains. Art style is super cool. The atmosphere is great. I really liked it, and it's quite short as well. So I definitely recommend it. And the game that was the biggest inspiration for Threshold, Pathologic. It's really kind of the same gameplay, it's pushing you into situations where you don't have enough time to do all that you have to do. You've got to make choices, so it's a little less the case in Threshold, but in Pathologic, it's that times 10, you are asked to do so many things, but you don't have the time to do them all, and people will die because of that, no matter what you do. Even if you are, a doctor and you are trying to save people, it's eventually picking who will die, basically, by having to run everywhere and, also fight, but you are not a fighter, so you fight really badly, and that's super cool. That's emotionally extremely engaging, and that's what I wanted with Threshold as well, so it's putting you on the, on the line, on getting you into not the smoothest situation you could be in, I think it helps, getting you involved with your tasks, even if they are like quite unpleasant,
Yeah, 100%. Those are the last questions that I had. And so if there's any final thoughts or design ideas that you wanted to quickly mention before we wrap this up, then we can get out of here and let people go on with their day.
When we are speaking about, the difficulty and the little hidden things, so there's this difficulty system based on your country. So it has two parameters. It's basically the mountain you are in. So if you are playing in England, which has like the tallest mountain in England is like super small, so your air will deplete way slower. Sorry, and if you are in China, it's the Everest, so it's gonna deplete super fast. It's like a minute and a half of difference in between both air reserves. So it's a big difference. And the other one is the amount of animals slaughtered in the country you picked. So if there are more animals slaughtered in the country you picked, the train will slow down more often, which means that same for China, which slaughters a lot of animals, for US, which slaughters a lot of animals, the train will slow down much more often than if you pick a smaller country that consumes less meat, which is funny, because then you end up with people maybe in China or in the US more likely to be annoyed by a difficulty that would be maybe a bit too steep, or people who didn't maybe feel as much difficulty like in the UK or so, because they don't abide by the same rules. I think that's interesting.
It is definitely a unique concept, and as we've gone through each of these ideas that you've kind of brought up, I think that's one of the core tenets of that I think makes Threshold such a special game, is that you have these unique ideas and they express interesting political viewpoints, and there's a lot of themes of capitalism and things that we didn't really touch on, but this game is full of ideas. You've got a lot of ideas, and you mentioned earlier that you don't want to do things in the same way as everyone else, and I think that shows, because when I asked you to describe the game earlier, that's because I don't really know how to describe the game myself. Gameplay wise, it's an unconventional genre game. It's an non-traditional horror game. It takes inspirations from all sorts of areas, but ends up being its own thing, and I think you've succeeded greatly in that. So, Julien, thank you very much for joining me, for giving a ton of insight into the development history of this game. I hope everyone enjoyed and learned something about the game and goes and plays it. I will leave the link, if you haven't already played it, I'll leave the link in the description to the Steam page to go buy the game. And thank you very much for joining me.
Well, thank you.